Ever stopped to really think about a beautiful bouquet and wondered if there's maybe a smarter way to enjoy that kind of beauty,
Yeah.
especially, if you're thinking about the business side, the bottom line, or just wish
Often,
those gorgeous blooms could maybe stick around longer?
Yeah, that's exactly the question we're tackling today. We're going to dive into preserved versus fresh flowers, looking at whether these preserved options really offer a genuine advantage, in today's market and for modern consumers.
Exactly. And to help us figure this out, we're drawing on some really sharp experience here. Annie Zhang, she's the CEO of Sweetie Gifts.
Right.
She's got 2 decades in the flower industry, so she brings a huge amount of knowledge about global trends and the real nitty-gritty of how this all works.
And Annie's been in the thick of it, especially with international markets and understanding the supply chains, particularly out of China. It gives her a really unique, informed viewpoint on this whole comparison.
hmm So, the mission for us today, really, is to unpack this. Are preserved flowers, a viable, maybe even better alternative, or perhaps a valuable addition to the traditional fresh flowery setup? We're going to look at the key insights from Annie's experience.
Okay, where should we start? Maybe with how they're actually made
Yeah.
and how they get to us.
Yeah, let's do that. The production and logistics.
Well, what's fascinating right off the bat is just how different their basic nature is. Fresh flowers, it's all about speed, like immediacy.
Total race against time.
Exactly. A race from the farm to the vase. It needs that whole cold chain thing, refrigerated trucks, storage, often relies on quick, expensive air transport just to keep them looking fresh for that short window.
You just picture this like massive logistical dance just to keep them alive for, what, a few days?
Pretty much. Now, preserved flowers, they take a completely different route, don't they?
Seems like it. How does that work?
Well, the focus shifts. It's
Yeah.
much more about an intensive initial processing. And he talks about things like glycerin baths, careful dye infusions, using special drying rooms with controlled environments.
Huh. So it's more like manufacturing at the start.
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a more deliberate, almost industrial approach up front compared to the purely agricultural focus for fresh flowers.
Okay, so fresh flowers. Fast, perishable, high-stakes logistics. Preserved flowers, more work up front in processing, but then the payoff comes later, with how long they last.
That's the huge difference. Absolutely. The shelf life figures are just, well, they're worlds apart. Fresh flowers might give you, what, a week? Maybe 10 days if you're really lucky.
Yeah, about that.
Preserved flowers. And he says they can last anywhere from 12 months up to like 3 years.
Wow, 1 to 3 years versus maybe 10 days. That changes everything.
It completely reshapes the logistics. Yeah, think about it.
How so?
Well, that massively extended lifespan opens the door to much, much cheaper transport. And he points out they can be shipped by sea.
Ah, sea freight instead of air freight. Yeah.
Exactly. Which is often essential for fresh flowers to beat the clock. Sea freight is way less expensive.
That must be a massive cost saving. Does she give any examples?
She did mention one client, I think in Canada, who apparently cut their shipping costs by something like 40%.
Sure.
Just by switching, 40%.
40%. That's not just trimming costs. That's a huge strategic advantage, especially for international business.
It really is. It takes off that intense pressure of time-sensitive delivery and slashes a major expense line.
And Annie also laid it out quite clearly, didn't she? Comparing the two side by side.
Yeah, it was helpful. Like, cold chain needed, yes for fresh, no for preserved, shelf life, days versus months or even years,
Right.
production time. Fast but fleeting for fresh, more labor-intensive initially for preserved, and the labor itself farm-based, mostly for fresh, more factory-style for preserved.
It really paints a clear picture of two fundamentally different product types.
It does. Yeah. And thinking about those differences, that shelf life thing, it's not just about logistics. It has a really, really big impact on profit margins.
Okay, let's unpack that. How does lasting longer actually translate to more profit?
Well, think about the risk baked into fresh flowers.
Yeah.
You've got this incredibly short window to sell them.
Yeah, the clock is always ticking.
Right. So if they don't sell fast enough, what happens? You're discounting them heavily, maybe just having to throw them out. That waste, that spoilage, it just eats directly into your profits, especially around big holidays like Valentine's Day when you've maybe stocked up big time.
It's a constant gamble against wilting, basically.
Exactly that.
Yeah.
Now, preserved flowers, they offer so much more stability. Annie mentioned Sweetie Gift starts prepping for Valentine's Day way back in October.
October for February.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she said retailers can confidently reorder the same preserved designs the next year because the product is still perfectly good. That kind of stability, that flexibility, it's huge.
I can just imagine the relief not having that constant pressure to clear stock before it dies.
Precisely. It means you can plan longer marketing campaigns.
Right.
You can experiment more with displays, with packaging. You can place bigger orders without worrying about, finding massive cold storage or them decaying in a week.
And what about pricing? Fresh flower prices go up and down like crazy depending on the season or bad weather or those shipping costs we talked about.
That's another really key point Annie made. Preserved flower pricing tends to be much more stable, much more consistent,
Why is that?
because they're just not subject to the same wild swings in supply based on harvests, weather, or those urgent freight costs. Predictable pricing is a big win for businesses planning budgets and, frankly, for customers too.
Okay, so the takeaway here is longer shelf life isn't just convenient, it fundamentally shifts the economics. Less waste, more control.
Better margins,
Yeah.
exactly. More time to sell means fewer forced markdowns, less product literally thrown away. It leads to a much more predictable and potentially sustainable financial picture.
Right. Okay, so we've covered the production, the logistics, the business side of things. But what about the people actually buying them? Why are consumers seemingly getting more interested in preserved flowers?
Yeah, this is crucial. It touches on how our preferences might be changing. Annie's insight here is that modern consumers, maybe especially younger or more eco-aware buyers, are increasingly valuing things like aesthetics, long-term value, and durability,
Yeah.
perhaps even over the traditional idea of fresh gut right now.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. In a world where we're thinking more about sustainability, about getting real value from purchases, something that stays beautiful for months or years, that has real appeal.
Exactly. Preserved flowers really tap into that desire for, like, low-maintenance luxury. They look great, but you don't need to water them or fuss over them.
Yeah.
And like you said, they arguably align better with an eco-conscious mindset because you're not constantly buying and tossing.
And they sort of graduate from being a temporary gift to maybe becoming part of someone's home decor, right? Annie mentioned that this can lead to longer brand visibility, too.
That's a really interesting side benefit.
Yeah.
When a preserved arrangement sits beautifully on a shelf for a year, it's a constant, subtle reminder of whoever gave it, or the brand itself. It can definitely encourage repeat business or loyalty.
Hmm.
It's a lasting connection.
And it seems like it's not just, small niche florists picking up on this. Annie shared some pretty big names using preserved flowers.
Yeah, that was striking. Brands like Armani Beauty, Pandora Jewelry, even major retailers like Family Mart. They're putting preserved flowers in special gift sets.
That's not a small thing.
No, it's clearly a strategic choice. They're using preserved flowers to signal luxury, thoughtfulness that lasts, and enduring quality. It's a marketing tool for them, conveying a certain message.
That really says something, doesn't it? When brands like that get on board, it shows a real shift in how these products are perceived. And she also mentioned online search trends.
Yes, exactly. The fact that people are increasingly searching online for things like everlasting flower gifts or long-lasting roses, it's pretty clear evidence that consumer interest is genuinely growing.
Yeah.
People are actively looking for these durable options.
Okay, so the demand seems to be building. The logistics look advantageous. But let's tackle the cost question head on. Preserved flowers do generally cost more upfront than fresh ones, don't they?
That's true, yeah. If you compare wholesale costs, a preserved flower or arrangement will typically be higher than a similar bunch of fresh flowers. But, and this is the key thing, you have to look beyond that initial price tag.
You mean consider the whole picture, the return on investment?
Precisely. And he gave a really helpful comparison. Think about a fresh bouquet. Maybe it costs $10 wholesale, sells for $25. Sounds okay. But if you typically lose, say, 30% to spoilage, that $15 margin shrinks fast.
Right, you might only actually sell 7 out of 10 bouquets you bought.
Exactly. Now compare that to a preserved rose box. Maybe it costs $20 or $25 wholesale. Seems higher. But it might retail for $60, $70, even $80. And crucially, because it lasts so long, you're likely to sell pretty much all of them. Your waste is minimal, maybe zero.
Ah, so that spoilage factor, or lack thereof, is the game changer for profitability.
It seems to be the absolute core of it. Annie reported that at Sweetie Gifts, they consistently see preserved products outperform fresh ones on profit margin by like 30 to 50%.
30 to 50% better margins. Okay, that explains a lot.
Yeah, it makes it pretty clear why more online stores and gift shops are either switching entirely or at least adding preserved flowers as a major category. The numbers often just work out better.
So when you pay that higher initial price for preserved flowers, what are you actually paying for? It's not just the processed flower itself.
No, exactly. You're paying for Significantly less risk. The risk of spoilage basically disappears.
Yeah.
You're paying for much more flexibility in when and how you sell it. You're paying for what many customers see as higher perceived value and luxury, and you're paying for a much, much longer inventory life, less frantic restocking.
And it sounds like that perceived value and the fact they last so long often leads to happier customers, maybe more likely to come back.
That seems to be a big part of it too. Good customer feedback, the potential for repeat business because the gift was so memorable and long-lasting. That all feeds back into the overall value proposition.
Okay, so bringing this all together, Annie Zhang's insights really paint quite a compelling picture. Preserved flowers aren't just, a pretty alternative. They seem to offer a really practical and potentially much more profitable path forward in the modern flower market.
Yeah, they seem very well aligned with where consumer desires might be heading towards things that last, things that offer enduring beauty and solid value.
That really feels like the core message. Whether you're listening and thinking about maybe expanding a business or you just appreciate having beautiful things around that last. The advantages Annie points out, especially around lifespan and profitability, are pretty hard to ignore.
Absolutely. They present a strong case.
And it really makes you think, doesn't it? If this shift towards like longevity and sustainability is happening with something like flowers, where else could we see this? What other things that we usually think of as perishable could be reimagined for longer enjoyment, more value, less waste? Especially as we all seem to have less time and more focus on, well, making things last.
That's a great question to leave people with. How this desire for durability, for reducing waste, might ripple out into other industries, other consumer choices. It's fascinating to consider.
Indeed. And just as a final note, if you are interested in exploring preserved flowers more, maybe for your business or just out of curiosity, Annie Zhang and her team at Sweetie Gifts did say they're happy to answer questions.
Oh, that's useful.
Yeah, you can reach them by email at sales@sweetie-group.com. Could be a good resource if you want to dive even deeper. Okay, thanks for exploring this with us.